Two Omicron cases in a nearby city put Beijing on high alert. It's weeks before the Winter Olympics start. A rare and courageous move. A Xi'an resident uses his real name in a video to criticize the lockdown measures, saying the authorities treat people like livestock. Some English signs in Beijing subways and airports are replaced by Chinese Pinyin. Foreigners won't be able to understand them, but some say it's part of Xi Jinping's effort to show cultural self-confidence. The Chinese regime has named a new commander for its military force in Hong Kong. The man used to lead the crackdown on Xinjiang's ethnic minorities. And U.S. chip company Intel appears to be walking back on a statement where they called on partners to avoid sourcing from China's Xinjiang. This is after getting backlash from China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Beijing is on high alert over a neighboring city's first Omicron cluster outbreak. China's northern coastal city of Tianjin began testing its 14 million residents on Sunday. That's after authorities detected 2 local cases of the Omicron variant. The city is about 30 minutes from Beijing by express train, and many commuters work and live in the 2 cities. This outbreak threatens to disrupt the upcoming Winter Olympics, which will be staged in Beijing next month. According to Chinese official media outlet Xinhua, commuters traveling from Beijing to Tianjin have been asked to stay away. The city authorities said on Monday they are aiming to complete mass testing in Tianjin within 2 days. They say it's to, quote, resolutely prevent the virus spreading, especially to Beijing. The city is under partial lockdown. Buses and trains from Tianjin to Beijing have been suspended, and the city closed some subways and canceled some domestic flights. Despite local authorities' promises of adequate supplies, the outbreak prompted a flurry of panic buying. Many supermarkets and grocery store shelves are now empty. The authorities have not announced the end of the lockdown. But looking at the Chinese Communist Party's previous actions, it's likely the lockdown will last until the end of February, when the Beijing Winter Olympics is over. City officials reported another 20 positive cases on Sunday. That brings the total in Tianjin to 40. But the Chinese Communist Party's history of concealing and underreporting virus cases means we cannot independently verify those numbers. The source of this outbreak in Tianjin is still unclear, as the first 2 detected cases reportedly had not traveled outside the city recently, and they had no contact with others who tested positive. But the virus may have been spreading in Tianjin for some time. Authorities pointed to virus cases in another city 300 miles away, saying a university student in Anyang city of Henan province was also infected with the same type of Omicron variant. The student returned from Tianjin to Anyang at the end of December, and this is believed to be how the highly contagious variant spread. This would mean that at least 2 weeks ago, the student had caught the virus in Tianjin. In a city just outside Beijing, this weekend marked a new round of mandatory virus testing for all residents. That's after the city named Tianjin detected its first cluster of the Omicron variant. A ways away in Xi'an city, residents are also getting retested, even though city officials announced the area had basically achieved its zero COVID goal just days before, meaning the virus is allegedly no longer spreading there. But evidence suggesting the opposite has cropped up since then. This video was captured Sunday morning. That's when some communities in Xi'an suddenly received notice of an emergency round of virus testing. The clip shows a gathering of what looks to be thousands of people. A local resident told NTD that anyone who refuses to get tested will be taken away by police. To protect her identity, we used her last name only.
Basically, it's done every day. When they call us with the loudspeakers, we have to go down and take the test. If you refuse, the police will immediately arrest you.
On Saturday, about 200 neighborhoods in the city were upgraded to a complete lockdown. Under those orders, household doors are sealed shut from the outside, and no one is allowed to leave their homes.
Where there are cases, all infected people will be taken away, isolated, and quarantined. Basically, 0 cases means they will be taken outside of the neighborhood.
According to official figures, 45,000 people from Xi'an have been removed from their homes and put in isolation, either inside makeshift hospitals or quarantine centers. Video reveals that even some underground parking garages have been repurposed as quarantine centers, and authorities are still adding beds. As part of the lockdown, Chinese authorities are censoring what they've labeled as negative information, meaning photos, videos, or information about poor conditions or extreme tactics used are quickly removed when posted online. But a handful of them manage to circulate before getting deleted. One clip captures someone on the ground next to a high-rise residential building in Xi'an. Residents can be heard shouting, "Someone jumped off the building." But little can be seen on site, since residents are to stay inside, blocked from getting too close. This is the second similar report from Xi'an to emerge on social media in recent days. No Chinese media outlets have reported on the incidents. NTD cannot verify the motive behind them or if they're related to the pandemic or local lockdowns. The video has since been removed. A rare moment for a Chinese citizen. A resident from Xi'an apparently used his real name to voice strong dissatisfaction about the stringent lockdown measures there. He says the authorities are treating people like livestock. The man says in a video his name is Yang Hai. He explains that the authorities have wrapped steel wire over buildings' entrances, and people's homes are being sealed off with police tape. Because of this, food supplies cannot be delivered. He questions the authorities if they are aiming for more than 10,000 citizens to die. Yang shows some text messages from other residents saying food isn't being distributed systematically. He adds this kind of prevention measure treats the people like livestock. The man explains that many residents' food reserves are almost completely depleted. China is holding firm to its zero-COVID policy, which aims to completely eradicate the virus within its borders. But the policy had led to strict lockdowns across the country. And as workers stay at home, supply chain problems are worsening. Next, we look at the situation across some Chinese cities.
After nearly 3 weeks of strict lockdown orders, officials in Xi'an City have announced restrictions will gradually lift, provided certain conditions are met. But so far, the restrictions are still in place. On Monday, authorities urged the public to continue holding the line. But at the same time, a notice saying the opposite started circulating online. It claimed areas under lockdown were already reopening. Xi'an police soon labeled it as fake news. Despite the contradicting information, Xi'an is still fully shuttered, and that shutdown has dealt a major blow to the Chinese economy. The metropolis houses a population of over 10 million people. It's also known as a manufacturing hub for computer processors and microchips, used in smartphones, auto parts, and other electronics. Samsung, for one, says its factories in Xi'an City have faced significant holdups. One of the products affected, NAND, a kind of flash storage memory chip. The electronics company produces over 40% of its NAND chips in Xi'an, making up around 15% of total global supply. An expert from U.S.-based credit ratings agency Fitch Ratings says if Xi'an's lockdown continues, it will negatively affect global supply of NAND flash memory chips and boost uncertainty surrounding technological production. But aside of manufacturing, shipping access is also feeling the lockdown effects. Amid China's lockdown, authorities partially cut off access to a coastal city called Ningbo, a neighbor to Shanghai. The city boasts some of the world's busiest ports, but nearby closures may trigger a rise in already high shipping costs. Economists from Japanese financial services company Nomura say Chinese lockdowns are already causing disruptions.
China is reporting a very low death rate from COVID or the CCP virus. And while the Chinese Communist regime sees this as a success and proof of the regime's legitimacy, can people trust those figures? U.S. business magazine Forbes published an article last week saying China's official numbers on the virus are not trustworthy. The article, titled "Beijing is Intentionally Underreporting China's COVID Death Rate," is written by the Stevens Institute of Technology's Quantitative Finance Program Director, George Calhoun. To study China's data validity, the report compared it to 3 nearby countries: Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. These countries are not only geographically near, but also tend to take relatively strict control measures, like Beijing. And in one aspect, they are even ahead of China. Their healthcare systems are much better. But China's reported virus mortality rate is 30 to 50 times lower than these 3 countries. And there is no reason found to explain this difference. China also shares borders with 14 countries, all of which have been struck seriously by the virus, with infection and death rates hundreds of times higher than China's. And while China has closed its borders for some time now, illegal border crossings continue. The article asks, quote, "How does China keep all that bubbling contagion at bay?" Forbes' report also includes a list emphasizing how international research bodies had to drop China from their study due to Beijing's denials and data destruction. The Chinese Communist Party seems to be embracing a new step in decoupling with the international community, at least where language is concerned. In Beijing, workers are gradually changing up local subway signs. The city is taking down English names, replacing them with romanticized Chinese or Pinyin instead. Pinyin is the phonetic spelling of Chinese words using English letters. Here's one example from inside a subway station. The sign reads "Binghai Guoji Jichang," which translates to Binghai International Airport. That's not the only case. Another transit sign reads "Weigongchun Zhan," which means Weigongchun Station. The changes began last month, just weeks ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Beijing authorities said the changes aim to unify signage translations in accordance with regulations. But some remain unconvinced. Even one of China's major state-run media outlets is seemingly against the move, calling the change impractical. It says Chinese speakers don't need the adjustment, and visiting foreigners won't be able to understand. Many see the move as part of Beijing's pushback against the English language. That's amid Communist Party leader Xi Jinping's ideological war against Western influence. When he came to power in 2013, the communist leader promoted a policy of so-called cultural self-confidence, and suppressing the English language is part of it. Other aspects include ramping up scrutiny on Western movies and publications. Beijing's apparent effort to reduce English language use seems to be popping up elsewhere too. Chinese tutoring companies are also struggling, under pressure from the Chinese Communist Party's clampdown on the sector. Major tutoring firm New Oriental has seen its market value drop by a stunning 90%. This is according to a Saturday comment by the company's founder. The regime's clampdown started last year. It began when Beijing implemented a new policy, banning for-profit off-campus tutoring. New Oriental founder Yu Minghong says New Oriental has paid over $3 billion in tuition refunds, employee dismissals, and location leasing cancellations by the end of 2021. He explains revenue has been reduced by 80% and that the company was forced to let around 60,000 employees go. New Oriental is one of the largest providers of TOEFL and IELTS exam training in China. These are 2 major standardized tests used to measure the English language ability of non-native speakers. They are also required for non-native speakers who wish to study in the U.S. or enroll in other English-speaking universities. The company's business also includes English tutoring for students K-12. New Oriental is one of China's largest education companies and is the first Chinese learning firm to go public in the United States. Now we look to Hong Kong. Beijing has appointed a new commander to the Chinese military force in Hong Kong. The new commander, Peng Shuai, used to be in charge of the armed police force in Xinjiang. The U.S. says Beijing has been committing genocide in that region. Xinjiang is home to 12 million Uyghurs, members of an ethnic minority. Washington says Beijing has been suppressing the population through slave labor, mass detention, and forced sterilization. Peng reportedly has experience in leading the crackdown on the Xinjiang's Uyghur population. While he was there, he developed a special task force called the Mountain Eagles. In just 1 year, the force fired the same number of bullets as all other security forces combined over 3 years. Some China watchers think Peng's appointment is a signal from Beijing that the Chinese regime won't tolerate any mass protests in Hong Kong. The Chinese regime has maintained a military force in Hong Kong since 1997. Those troops usually don't interfere with local affairs, and Hong Kong police are the ones maintaining public order. But if Hong Kong authorities need assistance, they have the option to ask Beijing's military force to step in. Australia's defense minister is urging celebrities to speak up about a missing Chinese athlete. The tennis player Peng Shuai is one of China's biggest sports stars. She went missing after alleging that a former top official sexually assaulted her. Peng's allegations rocked the international community. After she disappeared from public view, both the White House and the European Union questioned Beijing on her whereabouts. And a hashtag Where's Peng Shuai went viral on Twitter. Big sports stars like Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka also voiced concern about Peng's safety. Still, Australia's Defence Minister Peter Dutton says not enough celebrities are speaking up, compared with the power and influence of the Me Too movement in the West. Dutton said he doesn't understand how, in the Me Too age, quote, we can have an international female tennis star who claims to have been raped and sexually assaulted, and she's now effectively under house arrest and has had her social media account wiped. And somehow that's behavior that we should tolerate. He adds that people better speak publicly about it, saying that otherwise the behavior won't change. Last month, Peng re-emerged in a video interview with a pro-Beijing newspaper. In it, she walked back on her statement, saying she never made any allegations of sexual assault. But the Women's Tennis Association and French tennis player Elisa Cornet says they are still concerned about Peng's safety. U.S.-based microchip maker Intel is walking back a statement urging supply chain partners to not source from China's Xinjiang region. That's after the company apologized to China last week. The statement came in the form of an open letter published last month. In it, the company said Intel is required to ensure our supply chain does not use any labor or source goods or services from the Xinjiang region. The letter prompted heated backlash from Beijing. Intel later issued an apology to its Chinese partners. Now, the chip company has backtracked completely and removed all mention of the word Xinjiang from the letter. The Xinjiang region has become a growing point of conflict between China and companies based in democratic nations. More recently, Walmart has endured similar pushback from Beijing. It followed reports that the retailer had stopped selling goods sourced from Xinjiang. A small Chinese city near the Russian border is in the spotlight right now. Hegang has become the first case of municipal bankruptcy in China. How did this happen, and how will it impact investors? NTD's Chenny Wu has the details.
Dependent almost entirely on coal mining, Hegang's economy has been on the ropes for years. The pandemic appeared to push it over the edge. At the end of last December, the local government announced on its official website that the city had frozen hiring and begun official restructuring. What does this mean?
It's just the bankruptcy, but they don't call it. They don't want to use the word bankruptcy.
Frank Xie, business professor at the University of South Carolina, Aiken, says the Chinese regime tries to avoid using the term bankruptcy, mainly because of political considerations.
Now they're running into a deficit and they're bankrupt. That means they're losing legitimacy at every level.
As for the reasons behind the municipal bankruptcy, Xie says over the last couple of decades, the Chinese economy has developed through overbuilding.
They invested heavily on all those infrastructures, and they have roads that, lots of roads, high-speed rails, airports, but have airports that they don't have a flight. There's the overcapacity, the overspending, and they're heavily in debt.
Considering Beijing's recent tolerance of defaults by state-owned enterprises, some investors are convinced they'll be protected. According to a November analysis by credit sites, local rating agencies in China still awarded investment grades to local governments with very weak credit profiles. Xie believes the Chinese economy is built on lies with falsified numbers at all levels.
They just cannot hide anymore. With the revenue, with the economy slowing down, we're in recession, with the debts mounting, and with due days approaching, they just cannot pay it.
Xie says, like the Evergrande debacle, the debt crisis affects not only the real estate sector, but also the entire Chinese economy. So investors and lenders will need to watch their step. Chenny Wu, NTD News.
U.S. lawmakers are urging American athletes to not use Beijing's digital currency during the upcoming Winter Olympics. That's amid surveillance concerns. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
Beijing is inching one step closer to its latest currency goal. It's trying to get more people to use a digital version of its official currency, called the digital yuan. That's by making a pilot version of the digital yuan app available to more users. Users can open a digital wallet within the app and use digital money to make transactions. Not everyone is allowed to use the app yet. At this point, only those in big cities like Beijing and Shanghai can access it. Beijing hasn't officially rolled out the digital yuan on a national basis, but it has been working on the project since 2014. Plus, it's been pushing the international use of its currency. Beijing is set to host the Winter Olympics next month, and authorities say the digital yuan will be available to foreigners visiting for the games, even if they don't have a Chinese bank account. Some experts warn Beijing's push for wider use of digital yuan has a bigger goal: to replace the US dollar as the dominating international currency. Right now, the US dollar is the most powerful currency in the world. It accounts for almost 90% of global transactions. This gives the US an important power: the ability to sanction individuals or countries. For example, those who engage in human rights abuses. In one case, the U.S. exercised that power against Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong. Washington slapped a sanction on her in 2020 for undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. After that, Lam was forced to live on cash-only transactions because banks refused to violate the sanctions and open accounts for her. That fear extended to Chinese banks too, over the possibility of losing access to the U.S. dollar. And China's digital yuan has another catch. It's controlled by China's state-owned central bank, which means the Chinese government can track every transaction completed in this currency. And several U.S. lawmakers have been voicing concerns. They're calling on the U.S. Olympic Committee to ban American athletes from using the digital yuan at the Winter Olympics. In a statement, the lawmakers warn Olympic athletes that the digital yuan may be used to track them. Juliet Song, NTD News.
China is not only using surveillance system on Chinese people, but also exporting them to other totalitarian countries. A China-based company, TND, has reportedly been selling video surveillance systems to Iran. Surveillance research group IPVM found that TND signed a 5-year contract with Iran and plans to open an 8-person office there. TND is one of the largest video surveillance companies in the world. It is known for its unethical product line, including smart tables that go with Chinese torture chairs, and AI facial recognition to automatically identify someone's ethnicity. TND is not a state-run company, but it is one of the Chinese regime's largest suppliers. Its CEO is a former member of the Party Congress. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.